in terms of it coming to Dallas. Some of the first settlers here, like William Brown Miller, the Cockrell family, were all slaveholders. They brought their enslaved people from Alabama and Tennessee and Kentucky and Arkansas in order to build their wealth, and of course, eventually to make Dallas this sort of wealthy settlement out here in a very real sense was literally a wilderness.
As far as the early days of Dallas, the slave trade obviously made up a lot of the workforce. Cotton played, an important role in establishing sort of a racial dichotomy in its early days. You can't underestimate the fact that a lot of very powerful people in the city were members of the Klan in the, I think, early 20s, Klan Day at the State Fair.
Dallas and Fort Worth sort of fit into what is basically a national phenomenon in the sense of the Klan becomes real popular all across the country. And of course, they adopt stances such as being anti-immigrant, so they're very nativistic, anti-Catholic, anti-Semitic, and of course, anti-Black. And literally, they're trying to, as they say, reclaim the country. And of course, at the end of the war, they get really popular, specifically in places like Dallas and Fort Worth. Mayor Cabell wanted to find out how many members of the police department were members of the KKK. Well, he got the police chief to compile a list, and lo and behold, every member of the Dallas Police Department in 1920 was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. So the stance then that the Dallas Morning News took was very, very important because they were literally going against the trend that was occurring not only in Dallas but across the country. African GIs and veterans, for example, in many cases could not get the loans and the support to get training and education. Then, of course, this also affected housing. And as we know, housing is key to wealth in this country.
I can sort of speak to this one on a personal level. On December the 7th, 1941, my grandfather was a college student. He had just become a member of Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, which is the first African-American fraternity. So this is big stuff in the Black world to be initiated. And on that morning, he finds out about Pearl Harbor. And by that afternoon, he and all of his line brothers had joined the US military and went to go serve. They come back. For my grandpa, he had it a little bit easier because he worked at a very well-known African-American owned business in Detroit at that time. And so the gentleman who ran that business, a man named C.A. Howell, put my grandpa in business, whereas some of his other friends who were line brothers who joined the service, they had a very difficult time because they didn't get the benefit of the GI Bill. And so they felt it was their pride that led them to go fight in the war. But when they came home, they were very upset about the disproportionate treatment that they got after putting their lives on the line to serve the country.
In Dallas, of course, right after the Civil War, many African Americans sort of migrated to Dallas from the rural areas of the state. They created what was called freedmen towns around the city. There were several, Joppa, for example, Deep Ellum, the fact that African Americans could not live in predominantly white areas in the city. In fact, in 1916, the city passed a residential segregation ordinance, which literally said that Blacks and whites could not live in the same city blocks. The Supreme Court actually struck down a residential segregation ordinances that prohibited African Americans from living anywhere that they wanted. Of course, then white Americans got around this then by coming up with what was called restrictive covenants. That is, they would put in the deeds of homes that a homeowner white homeowners could not sell the home to a Negro, a Mexican, and even a Jew. Lincoln High School was built in 1939, for example. It bordered on what then was a traditionally white neighborhood in South Dallas. And as African Americans tried to move then into the area near Lincoln High School, their homes were bombed. This occurs again in 1950 and 1951, where 10 homes of African Americans are bombed again here in South Dallas. And this time, the city tries to resolve the matter by creating Hamilton Park. And of course, most of you know that Hamilton Park is up northeast of Central Expressway. So that's, again, it's sort of the history of residential segregation here in Dallas and how it developed.
I think this long-running racial inequities in the country have really been exploited by the coronavirus, because the pandemic has really fallen unevenly and has hit disproportionately African American and Hispanic people and poor people in general.
I'd say even though it's 20 years late, maybe 30 years late, that Dallas is becoming a more equitable city. I think it's very positive that politics have become, and again, I'm trying to be somewhat apolitical here, that politics in the city have become more equitable. You see African Americans serving as judges, and African Americans and Mexican Americans serving as judges and city council persons and county commissioners. There's still this economic differential between North Dallas and South Dallas, and that is something that the city needs to address.
Being president of UNT Dallas, our students are constantly inspiring me. And when you look, and most of them are first generation, most of them come from very modest households. Their parents are supportive, but most of them have not been to college.
We cannot lose sight of the fact that so many of us, Black, brown, and white, and Asian, are stuck below the poverty line with few opportunities to climb out. We cannot forget that, because if we are going to live up to our potential as a nation, and this notion of the American dream being accessible to all, it cannot just be to those people who are comfortably in the middle class.